Did you know that the principles that you learned in science class can be the principles that unlock potential, opportunity, and blessings in your life? I didn't know, but now I do. And I want to share with you in this podcast the things that could really open up doors for you. Keep it locked. Hey everyone, it's Ryan Robinson. Welcome back to Shifts and Ladders. If you haven't already, share this podcast, subscribe, not just on Apple Music, Spotify, but we're on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, everyone. And I don't think anyone knew, but I'm telling you today, if you get on YouTube right now, search for Shifts and Ladders, subscribe to this podcast. We're doing video and we're doing audio. So I want to make sure we're reaching everyone but I believe that the message that we're sharing has opportunities to reach masses and actually change the way people see their lives, man. Because I believe shifts come from revelation, and those shifts cultivate opportunities for elevation. We're going to continue on this path of growth through this podcast. All right. Awesome. We talked about last week some of the opportunities that come with change. And as we were going through, we got to this piece of talking about principles. And principles are things that are, in many cases, no matter who the yielder or the person practicing said principle, it will work no matter what's going on. So there is a concept brought by Myron Golden, who is an incredible businessman, YouTuber, preacher. And one of the things that he says is this, is every principle of physics is a microcosm of another, meaning for something to be true somewhere, it has to be true everywhere. And that's the qualifications for it to be a principle. Okay. Let's talk about, for example, reciprocity, meaning reciprocal. So if you give something to someone, you may not get that same gift from somebody else, so from the same person that you gave the gift to, but eventually it will come back around, right? It is, in some religious institutions or religious beliefs, they call it karma. They call it, reaping what you sow, those kind of principles, right? That kind of work. Now it works for everyone. No one gets special exemption because if you're mean to somebody, best believe eventually you planted seeds and those things come out. I don't know why they work that way, but they work that way, right? It's the way God designed the earth with principles by which it rules. Another one being ask questions. Ask and you shall receive. Like, people who usually ask usually get what they need. We typically say this: squeaky wheel gets the oil. That's the way we socially synthesize a principle that's found in the Bible and say, if you need something, you better speak up. Right? So squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? If you have a need and you don't say it, whose fault is it? It's yours, because you did not express that you had a need, right? So these are principles that can be true no matter where you are, no matter how old you are, no matter what circumstance you apply it in, whether it is your job, whether it is in your family, whether it is in your finances, whether it is in your relationships. If you don't ask, if you don't speak up, if you don't give, it still works, right? So that's what is so important. Why is this important? Because one of the things that we've neglected are the principles that we learn in school. I love school. I love teaching. I love learning. But there are some things that I did not realize is that when we talk about principles are not defined and locked in the disciplines that they have been taught. They are actually designed to find patterns in one area so that you have some level of explanation to be able to correlate what's happening in one area and possibly happening in another. So I want to talk about at least 3 of these particular principles. There are multiple. And I'll conclude with one major one. And we might have to have a whole nother podcast on it because there's books on it. There's all kinds of things, but I want to at least set the stage for some of the principles that we actually already walk through in a day to day. So first one being the principle of inertia. And inertia, excuse me, is getting something to is easier or harder to get something moving. So think about the amount of effort you have to put in to roll a bowling ball down the lane. But because of the speed you put it, the oil that's on the lane, it picks up speed. Therefore, the velocity of it actually keeps moving and grows and grows and grows. And it's easier to make it faster than it is to move it at a complete stop, right? So what we've heard in that regard is that is actually, if we're applying this particular principle to a business, okay, it's easier to grow a business that's already moving. People say it's the hardest getting anything started, whether it be a business, a relationship, a household, parenting, is always the hardest in the beginning because you have to create the momentum that moves you in the direction that you desire to go. Okay. It takes a lot of effort, but once you get moving, it gets a little easier, right? And then if it changes again, like with kids, yeah, you have to like adjust to new sleeping patterns or to new things, but you've been in the mode of being a parent long enough, you kind of know and have an idea that you're going to have to adjust at some point. And, there's continued learnings, teaching, books, all that kind of stuff to help you as you go down the parenting road, as well as starting a business. The biggest and hardest part is just getting started. That's what you hear. Most YouTubers, anyone starting anything says, I just need you to start. Because starting takes so much effort to get moving. Perfect example. Any rocket that you see that is launching, whether it's SpaceX or I don't even know if NASA's doing anything. If they are, great. But it takes a tremendous amount of force to actually lift up a rocket to, one, fight the law of gravity, one, two, break through the atmosphere, and then three, be launched in such a way that it takes course in a space that's weightless. That's a lot of stuff. But once it's moving, it's okay, right? It's going to continue to move, but it takes a lot of effort, which means there's so much force in order for it to get moving. But either way, that's a principle. That's a principle. Think of snowballs. Like, it's easier to get like when a snowball starts small. Once it starts getting bigger, it's because it used the momentum based on a slant to continue to grow. And that's what you're talking about when it comes to like Dave Ramsey. Use him for example. He has the debt snowball, where it's like it's not about what you're doing; it's about creating the momentum, right? So this particular law is in practice in everything. We just choose not to. We don't apply that particular principle over in other areas and aspects of our life. The next one, I spoke about this, gravity, the principle of gravity. What goes up must come down. When you, our lives have ups and have downs, Bible says the rain falls on the just and the unjust, meaning that there's going to be days when you're going to have favor. There's going to be days that you're not going to have favor. There's going to be people that don't know about God and believe God, but those folks are going to have rough days too. It doesn't mean that anybody or anything is exempt from having a rough day. And on top of that, let's look at our markets. Let's look at the stock market and the ups and the downs that come with that. And particularly, there's people who are specialized investors and brokers that actually study the ebbs, flows, ups and downs of not only businesses, but our entire economy and the well-being of financial institutions and companies. It is designed on ebbs and flows. There's going to be years that things are going to go great, and there's going to be years where it's going to be rough. It's not always going to be good. And honestly, most companies and investors are always looking for some kind of growth, right? No one wants anything to not grow. I mean, we're naturally designed to grow. But at the end of the day, no one wants a company to lose. Everyone goes into business to grow something, right? So we got to be mindful that there's going to be ebbs and flows to that growth, right? There's going to be aches. There's going to be pains. If you've been a teenager, you know, you've gone through the ebbs and the flows of what it's like to grow through adolescence into young adulthood and into adulthood. Like, you know, then you get older, then you got aches and pains, and there's good days and there's bad days, right? So there is principles then that applied here. But we have to also be aware that those ups and downs need to be prepared for. And I'm gonna give you an example. In the book of Genesis, Joseph, when he was brought out of, I believe it was Genesis chapter 41, I believe. But Pharaoh had a dream that he could not interpret. There were seven healthy, he had two dreams, one with seven healthy cows that were there, and then some that were like really, they just looked unhealthy. And the unhealthy cows ate the healthy cows. And then he had another similar dream, same thing with the wheat, the same kind of dream took place. And he could not interpret the dream. He had all these magicians and all those kind of stuff. They could not interpret the dream. So the cupbearer remembered Joseph, and they pulled Joseph because he had interpreted his dream about a chapter or two ago, actually technically in the Bible 2 years ago. And he said, there's a man that interpreted my dream. So essentially they get Joseph, clean him up, bring him to Pharaoh, and summarize it. He basically said to Pharaoh, this dream is actually a word from the Lord that he's giving unto Pharaoh. That means there's going to be 7 years of incredible growth and plenty, but then there's also going to be 7 years of famine. And this is what I recommend. Based on what I'm seeing, we probably need to take these great years and store about a fifth of that, and then it will prepare us for the years that we're not doing so great. And that positioned him in such a way that he became a prime minister to the entire land of Egypt, and Pharaoh only being the only individual that was over him in power. Why am I saying that? The thing that Joseph was given was the ability to see the ebbs and the flows, the gravitational changes that take place in life. And by God's providence and insight, Joseph was able to lead a country that was not his own, right? So why do we have to say it? And this is it's in the book of Proverbs as well. We need to prepare when we're in season and out of season. You know, that is the nature of the world. We have spring, summer, fall, and winter. You got to prepare. That's gravity. That's the principle of gravity working in our environments, right? And then the last one is resistance. I got onto this, but it kind of works in the same way. I I guess inertia and resistance are one and the same coin, but resistance says this. It is like, for example, a plane uses the most amount of fuel on getting off the ground, right? So that in itself is super important because most of the time, the amount of gas and power that's used at that time is usually going from 0 to whatever, not from, or sorry, 0 to 30 instead of the 30 to 60, right? But the inertia says you have motion. So long as it stays in motion, it's going to grow, right? So the resistance to get to that point is always working against the inertia, which causes friction, right? So resistance, there's always going to be resistance. Whether you're trying to do something, there's going to be challenges that are going to come up, whether you're trying to be a good parent, whether you're trying to save money, whether you're trying to build a great relationship, whatever you're doing, you're always going to meet resistance. It's a principle that you're going to find and really determine how much effort you want to put into the direction you want to go. It is what it is. And unfortunately, most people don't want to get going because they don't want to deal with the hard thing first. Once you get moving, then it's easier. But the hardest thing is getting started, is getting moving, is dealing with the resistance so that at least once I get moving, I can start, as long as I keep the momentum moving, I will be able to manage the resistance. But as soon as I need to go to a whole different level, as soon as I need to go faster, I'm going to start to be impacted by resistance again. Why? Because I'm going to a whole nother level, and the amount of resistance that I'm getting is equal to where I'm going. So as long as I'm going 70, the resistance I'm going through is 70, unless I push past that to 8. In order to go to different levels, you're going to have to deal with resistance. It's a fact of the matter. There's a book called The Art of War by Stephen Pressfield. And the thing is, he says this: resistance is the thing that keeps people from actually determining if they want something on the other side of it or not. So he calls the opposition to greatness resistance. What are you not pushing past in order to get to what you desire? Has the resistance challenged you and kept you from obtaining what you believe for yourself? The principles, y'all, are just all around us. We just haven't seen them yet. And the last thing here, and I'm going to lay the foundation for this, is what we call the Pareto principle. Pareto principle is something that many people have heard, but they don't know how it actually works. And the Pareto principle is essentially called the 80-20 rule. And we're going to talk about this on the next podcast because it really requires more time and effort. But it says that this 80% of the output that you create is correlated or tied to 20% of the inputs. And then if you're doing the 80% that you're working on, only 20%, if you do it in the inverse, only if you're the 80% that you're doing, only 20% of that is actually driving the value. So you're always having to determine, what do you need? What don't you need? But also recognize that less is better. That simple is better than complex. It's completely backwards. But there's biblical evidence by which we can glean from, talk about in the next podcast, why it's so important for us to find the things that matter so we can make what we do simple. It's not saying that simple is easy, but simple is worth it. All right. That concludes today's podcast. If you haven't, like I said, share, subscribe, like the podcast. Give me a thumbs up, y'all. We're trying to reach some great people with this particular message of shifts and ladders. So if you haven't, do what I, bring up and if you haven't yet, subscribe, share, let somebody know that they need it, and bless them. If you haven't, like I said, Keep it locked. We'll see you on the next podcast. Peace.